Hello, my name is Becky Denoy. I'm the adoptive mom of 4 children from Guatemala, China, and Russia. I've had a lifelong interest in older child adoption. I attended an adoption fair a few years ago, and while I was there, met the coordinator for the Russian Orphan Lighthouse project. I got to talking to her, and she encouraged me to host a child on an upcoming trip the Lighthouse project was doing. I thought, that sounds like fun, and I decided to recruit some of my friends to do it with me. As I recruited my friends, I inadvertently made myself indispensable and volunteered my way into a job. Since that time, God has used me to find families for 86 different Russian children and has helped me to find $320,000 for our adoptive families to complete their adoptions. I really feel like I found my purpose in life when I found the Lighthouse Project. The mission of our program is to spread the light of Jesus Christ as we seek and find forever families for older Russian orphans. We really strive to mirror God's special compassion for the weak and vulnerable by focusing preferentially on kids with special obstacles to placement. Those could be kids with special needs or sibling groups or older children. The director of our program is a lady who has really devoted her life to helping Russian orphans. Through her efforts, over 1,000 children have found their families. She lived in Russia for about 10 years while she worked for a different agency. Every night as she would walk home, at the end of her street, she would see older girls that were prostituting themselves. She was horrified to find out that those girls were aged out orphans. That was really the birth of the Lighthouse Project. In 1998, she started our program in an attempt to try to help kids who were older before they aged out of the orphanage. Through 55 trips, our program has helped over 300 kids find their families. She and I really love working together to help kids who have no other hope. There are 730,000 official orphans within Russia by the Russian government's own estimates. Russians in general, though, aren't very open to adoption. As kids get older, they'll age out of the orphanage between 15 and 18 years of age. They will typically end up on the streets where life expectancy is short. Statistics vary based on your source, but most sources agree that life expectancy is measured in months. Girls turn to lives of prostitution, boys to lives of crime. They're not doing those things because they want to. They're doing them because they don't have another option. Drug use is rampant. 10% of these kids will commit suicide. Only 10% are ever going to be productive members of society. We see a huge amount of desperation in our program. One orphanage visit that really stands out in my mind is a trip that we took to find kids for upcoming trips. And we went to interview kids for these trips, and kids were lining the halls to see us as we walked by because they knew why we were there. Older boys were putting on suits in an attempt to put their best foot forward when they met us. One boy that will always be in my mind is Slava. He walked into the orphanage director's office for his interview, and our translator said to him, "Slava, how old are you?" And he said, "I'm 16 years old." She looked at me and groaned and said, "There's nothing we can do. He's too old." As she showed him to the door where the orphanage director was letting kids in one at a time, the translator said to the director, "Don't you know that kids who are 16 and older can't come into the United States?" And the director said, "Yes, I know that. But when he came to me pleading, 'Please show me to them,' I couldn't say no." Another boy who really wanted a family was little Mikhail. He was looking out his window one day and saw a family that he recognized from one of our trips walking up. He was so excited to see them, he went running down the hallway, bounding down the steps, and he leapt into their arms. And they had to tell him, "We're here for somebody else." The vast majority of potential adoptive parents want healthy children as young as possible. Knowing that, our program brings families to Russia to meet kids ages 5 to 15. Families who travel with us are not yet committed to adoption, so many will take a chance they might not otherwise take. Once they see those kids and they see the faces and hear the stories, they don't see statistics anymore, they see real human beings, and they'll frequently decide to adopt. We focus very intentionally on kids that other agencies don't. Sibling groups, children with special needs, older children. Last year, we did 2.8% of the adoptions from Russia to the United States, but we did over 55% of all adoptions of teenagers. We're a little program, but we're making an eternal difference in a niche where very few programs work. During our visits, we give Bibles to the children who travel with us so that even if they can't meet an earthly father with us, they can still meet their heavenly Father, which is, of course, their very greatest need. Unfortunately, only 10 to 20% of children in any Russian orphanage are even available for adoption. Our goal is to help the unadoptable children as well. We want to teach skills to those kids so that they don't have to turn to prostitution or crime once they age out. Our goal is to install a sewing lab at one of our orphanages to teach older girls to sew. Sewing is still a marketable skill in Russia. We'd like to put in a computer lab at another orphanage to teach kids computer and keyboarding skills so that they've got something to do when they're done at the orphanage. We believe that projects like this will help to break the cycle of one generation of orphans begetting that next generation of orphans. The biggest problem we have in achieving our mission is that Russia is the most expensive country in the world to adopt from. We're a very, very tiny program. We did 30 adoptions to 18 families last year, so we don't have many families to divide our basic overhead between. Other agencies who focus on infant and toddler adoption only rarely do older child adoption, and they're able to use all those infant and toddler adoptions to help to subsidize the cost of their occasional older child adoption. We do virtually no infant and toddler adoption, so our families bear the entire brunt of the cost of their adoptions. 1/3 of our families don't even earn in a year what their adoption will cost them. In the course of my work, I found that the primary threat to kids being adopted are families not meeting them in the first place, and the high cost discouraging other families from even getting started. I've had hundreds of conversations about the Lighthouse project, and in the course of those conversations, I've determined a couple of initiatives that I think would make a big difference in our ability to help find families. The first is a project we call the Pay It Forward project. This project would grant $20,000 per family for their adoption, with an additional $5,000 to be given if the family is adopting an additional child at the same time. We believe if we were able to lower the cost of the adoption, we can find more people who would be willing to do it. I've corresponded extensively with nearly 500 new families in the last 2 years. 4% of those families will end up adopting through our program. Some of them will not adopt once they learn the issues that come with older child adoption, but the huge majority who give me a reason for not adopting tell me it's due to cost. There are so many kids I know who wait longer than necessary to find a family, and then once they find their family, wait longer than necessary for that family to be able to come to get them. Some even age out while they wait. A grant of this magnitude would cut the expense by about 1/3. Therefore, I project it should cut the children's waiting time by about 1/3 if their family needs to fundraise. That's the majority of our families. Families who don't need to fundraise will spend about 10 months in the adoption process. I want to lower that wait time for all of our kids. Denise was a boy who waited for his family for 23 months. When he finally was able to come home, he was 15 years old. He would have aged out had a generous donor not stepped in at the end to help his family. Alexander is 15 years old. Right now, he's been waiting nearly 3 years. He's a hearing-impaired boy, but it hasn't stopped him from writing profound poetry. When I heard him recite his poems, it gave me goosebumps. And to think that this kid, in just a few months, could be on the streets, it horrifies me. Some of our kids have special medical needs, and they could benefit from American medical care sooner. Our Tom is a little boy who is very, very dear to my heart. He's a 7-year-old boy. He's HIV positive. I looked for a family for him for 18 months and had him on 4 different trips to find his family. On an early trip that he came on, one of the host moms on the trip asked all the kids, if you could be any kind of animal, what kind of animal would you be? Our Tom said, I'd be an angel. It didn't surprise me. He was an angelic little boy. On his last trip that he came on, he finally found his family. We gave gifts to all of the kids, just treasures for them to bring back to their orphanage, as we do on every trip. And that little boy said, I want to say something to all of you. And he walked up onto a little stage that was in the room and said, thank you very much for doing this for me. I really like being here with you. And in all the years of doing this, and for all the kids that we've helped, I've never, ever had a child of any age that stood up to do that. Our Tom has his family now, but that family is going to have to fundraise, and I fear that they'll be fundraising for years while he has a medical need and a family who loves him already. There is nothing I would love more than to help to bring our Tom home sooner to his family. Denise was a boy with very, very profound scoliosis. When he finally came home to his family, his parents brought him to a surgeon who said if he had remained in Russia without surgery, he would have died. Just a few months ago, Denise was able to have his surgery. It was a 13-hour procedure, but he's doing much, much better now. The first time I ever spoke with his future mom, she thanked me very profusely and said, I really, really want to thank you for all that you're doing for these kids. Someone adopted me when I was 16 years old, and someone doing that for me made an eternal difference in my life. As part of receiving this grant, families will agree to fundraise $2,000 within 1 year of their new child's homecoming with the assistance of their new child. That money will go to fund our projects, our sewing machine projects and computer projects in the orphanage. As kids are doing this, they'll be helping to raise awareness of older children that are left behind in the orphanage, and they will learn that being blessed really obligates them to be a blessing. Another project that we're working on is called the Bring a Friend to Meet a Friend campaign. This project would allow a family who travels to Russia with us to bring an additional friend for free. I speak to a lot of families who would like to adopt, but they're concerned about travel by themselves. This would give them somebody to travel with. This would also make it easier for traveling families to recruit their friends to go with them. It could also double the potential families who meet the kids. I've seen again and again the limiting factor in the number of kids who get adopted is people meeting them. When people meet the kids, the Lord works in their hearts, and they'll frequently decide that they're going to adopt. All the time I have people who say they're going just to be nice to the children or to give the kids some encouragement and some attention. One lady who went on our trip was going just to be nice, and she ended up falling in love with a 13-year-old girl. And when she and her husband went back to Russia to complete their adoption, the girl's younger sister had become available, and so now they're returning to do that adoption as well. 2 kids being helped from one family who was only going to be nice. Another man brought his mom on the trip. His mom insisted she was not going to adopt and was adamant she did not even want to fill out the application to go on the trip because she wasn't going to adopt. However, she met Nastya on the trip, and she and her husband brought home that girl, that 15-year-old girl, earlier this summer. The other end of that spectrum is Vasily, a little boy that I have been promoting for 9 different trips. and I never have been able to find a family even to go to host him. And I think, what if I had some money to allow other families to go to meet this kid? We could find a family for him, and right now he's waiting in a loveless orphanage. There is no difference whatsoever between families who plan to adopt up front and families who travel planning not to adopt up front. Exactly 2/3 of both types of families end up adopting. And that is hammered home for me that participation, not pre-trip intention, is key to finding kids their families. When we find families that weren't looking to adopt, we're not just cutting the adoption pie into more pieces, we're making that pie bigger because we're finding people who didn't even know they were looking to adopt. We have several goals for the next 2 years. In 2012, we'd like to double our number of first-time traveling families versus 2011. We'd like to double our completed adoptions in 2013 versus 2011. We'd like to find families for at least 5 special needs kids in 2012. That could be kids that are HIV positive, kids that are blind or with limb differences, any condition. We don't ever want to say to a kid that because you have a special need, you can't have a family. We'd like to equip 2 of our poorest orphanages with either a sewing lab or the computer lab, all the necessary supplies, and the personnel to staff those in 2012. As we complete these projects at those orphanages, we'd like to expand that to the other orphanages where we work. We would also like to teach the kids English because English as a second language in Russia is an extremely marketable skill. We'd like to put in woodworking labs at the orphanages as well so that kids can have another option for future employment. While we don't do much work with the baby houses in our region, we're still aware of a very great need there as well. Young kids, infants and toddlers, will spend much of their day in cribs, and they're not there because there's no one who cares about them. There just aren't enough caretakers to give those kids what they need. We would like to hire elderly women to go in for a few hours per day and to hold the kids, to play with them, to talk to them, to give them the good start that every child needs and that every child deserves. The limiting factor in our ability to help these kids is not a lack of passion. It's not a lack of effort. It's not a lack of ability. It's not that we can't find willing families. The limiting factor in us being able to help kids is the high cost of adoption. We need $1 million in the next 2 years to fund these projects. Sometimes, though, that comes in small packages too. You can help kids who have no hope now to have hope for the future, to have a life, maybe even eternal life. And once these kids are home, they'll begin to help others who are like them. As their lives are changed, they'll begin to change others' lives. Thank you very much for helping us help the orphans of Russia.